It is Monday, February 29th, 2016, and welcome to the Multifarious Man Podcast, episode number 22, Must See TV, Cult Classics Part 2. Happy Leap Day. Now, if you haven't listened to episode 21, which was Cult Classics Part 1, Be Kind Rewind on this past weekend, stop right where you are, because I'm about to add some more items to the movie listing that would be spoilers if you didn't listen to the last episode. All right, you've had enough time. You've been forewarned. So here it goes. So on the previous episode, I had cult classic movies from the 70s and 80s. After I recorded the show and posted it, I realized there were a few glaring omissions that I'm adding now. So, first on the list is The Wraith. This is a movie where I believe Charlie Sheen was either a car driver or something that was in an accident, and somehow there was an alien involved, and it was this Wraith car. I just remember it being really good. So that's number one. Next, The Explorers. River Phoenix, young Ethan Hawke. Three friends build a spaceship in their backyard and go visit aliens. How could you not watch that? Next, Critters. This was a action, adventure, alien movie where aliens come to Earth, these little tiny gremlin-like creatures with spikes, and they kill everyone, and it's up to these kids out in the middle of the country to fight them. They made sequels. You can skip those. Well, maybe the second one you shouldn't skip, but Critters. Next, Just One of the Guys. Female reporter writes a story, gets passed over, and the story or internship's given to men. So to find a way to get through and get to internship, she goes to the rival high school as a guy. And hilarity ensues. Next, 7 Minutes in Heaven. A girl has a crush, I believe, on a senator. That's a pen pal. Runs away from home because she thinks she's going to go have 7 minutes in heaven with him. Next, Meatballs. Yeah, I know most people talk about movies with Bill Murray, but this is one of the ones that usually gets overlooked when they talk about Caddyshack, Stripes, Ghostbusters, all the rest. Meatballs is definitely good. Next, 3 O'Clock High. New tough kid comes to school. Nerdy kid touches him by accident. And, of course, God threatens he's going to beat him up at 3 o'clock. So the kid spends the whole day trying to find a way to get out of the inevitable beatdown. Paying people to protect him, anything he can think of. Excellent, funny movie, definitely worth watching. Finally, Clue. How do I forget this one? This one has a stellar cast, and it basically plays out the video game Clue, where you have Professor Plum, you have the lead pipe, you have the gun, and the wonderful thing about it, if you saw it on video, you got to see the 3 alternate endings, where in the movie theaters, I believe, you had to go to specific theaters to see the different outcomes. That's it. Those are the additional ones I can think of. And when we come back, we will get back to today's show, and that is going to be Cult Classics Part 2, Must See V Part 2. All right, we're back on the Multifarious Man Podcast, episode 22, Must See TV, Cult Classics Part 2. As always, I am your host, Jay Vincent. You can follow me on Twitter at MultifariousMan or the podcast blog at www.multifariousman.com. Now, as I said in the opening, on the last episode, I talked about cult classic films from the 70s and 80s. Well, on today's episode, I'm going to be talking about cult classic TV shows from the same decades. Now, you should note that to qualify, these shows had to have first run or new episodes during the 70s and 80s. So, shows that only existed in reruns, like the Monkees or the Munsters, although they count as cult classics, they are disqualified by the parameters of this episode. Hopefully, this show will bring back some long-lost memories from your childhood or make you rethink a show that you never gave a chance to back in the day. Either way, sit back, relax, and enjoy the trip down memory lane. Numerous and varied, greatly diverse and manifold, all the things I want to say that never been told. Dina Sinatra to Drake and Pharrell. When I'm listening to this week, you can never tell. Bogey and Bacall, even Meryl Streep. The devil wears Prada, even the big sleep. It doesn't matter where you stand, I'm the multifarious man. Welcome back to the show. Now, first up this week on Reading, Watching, and Listening To, I am reading a new series, and the first book is called Off Armageddon's Reef. And this is by sci-fi novelist David Weber. In this series, it's far into the future. Mankind has been destroyed by an unknown alien race, so to escape, they somehow get ships and a colony to a new planet, to a colony called Safehold. Now, the secret is they can't use advanced technology because that's how the aliens have found them on subsequent attempts to escape. So they have to embed in their society of ways to prevent them to learn geometry, algebra, kind of to prevent them from having the typical human nature to, develop new things and to try out new things. So the book just started. So far, so good. I'm really excited about this series. So more on this book and additional books in the series later. Now, what am I watching? I'm excited to say that this evening, Blind Spot is returning to NBC after their winter finale. Now, if you've never seen this show before, I don't want to give you any spoilers, but the series starts with a lady is found naked in Times Square with nothing but tattoos on her body. Now, this is a lady that they call Jane Doe. She has no memory, but the tattoos are used by the FBI to try to figure out different crimes. So think of it like the Blacklist, where Reddington has a list of names and they use that to solve crimes. Well, in this case, the tattoos are on this lady's body and they're using them to find out her true identity and to, of course, help thwart evil plots around the country. So first episode, I'm looking forward to it. From what I can see from the promos, it's going to be getting off to a really good start. Next, what am I listening to? Discovered this. I didn't know it was coming out on Amazon Prime, and it's a new album by Bonnie Raitt, and it's called Digging Deep. Now, Bonnie Raitt is a well-acclaimed blues guitarist, been around for many years. I've listened to this new album first run one time, and the standout that I found so far, and I'm sure I'll learn the names of the other song, is a cover of Need You Tonight by INXS. It's really bluesy, and I like her take on it. So check it out, Digging Deep. If you're an Amazon Prime member, you can stream it, or I believe it should be available on Apple Music also. So there you have it, what I'm reading, watching, and listening to. And when we return, cult classic TV shows from the 70s and 80s. All right, we're back on the show. Now, cult classic TV shows from the 70s and 80s. Now, when I first recorded this show and I had to re-record some segments of it, I had to take out a few because it went a little long. So originally, my list had a lot of cartoons mixed into it, but I found that would probably be better served if I do a whole show on famous or my favorite or cult classic cartoon series, and it doesn't have to be limited to any era. So here we go, starting with The White Shadow. Now, this aired from 1978 to 1981, and this is the story of a white former professional basketball player that takes a job as a basketball coach at a tough mixed-race school in Los Angeles. And I remember seeing this originally in first run and then later in reruns, and just the stories were really, unlike comedies that were on TV at the time, they were hard-hitting episodes that dealt with a lot of things like drug abuse, teen pregnancy, and then, of course, just racism that comes about from, people of different races working together to a common goal in an inner city school. Gang violence, things on that line. And at one point in the series, one of the characters actually dies. So, it was a hard hitting. I wish it would have lasted longer, but I have fond memories of watching it, The White Shadow. Next, Sigmund the Sea Monsters. Now, this was part of a group of shows from the world of Sid and Marty Krofft. Now, they were well-known puppeteers, and they had a few shows on. It wasn't just Sigmund the Sea Monsters. You also had H.R. Puff and stuff. But I think Sigmund the Sea Monsters was one of my favorite. And this aired from 73 to 75. And the exciting thing about this, Sigmund was a sea monster that wasn't good at scaring anybody. So he was friends with this guy, Johnny. He was by the beach. He had his two mean brothers and I think his mother. And as far as puppets go, I mean, there was no CGI. It was clearly, people inside giant suits. But I remember the show just being silly, and I was just excited when it came on as part of the whole block of shows in this world of Sid and Marty Krofft. If you've never seen it, do a search on YouTube. I'm sure you can find it out there. It was pretty interesting. They also had a show called The Bugaloos, which was about these people with wings that were like a British band. Yeah, I don't know what the concept behind that, but I enjoyed that show too. Next, nowadays Marvel has all these TV shows and movies out. Well, back in the 70s, they had Shazam, who's also known as Captain Marvel. So 1974 to 77. And this is a story of a young boy that's able to transform into superhero Captain Marvel and travels the country in a Winnebago with, I guess, this older gentleman that was his mentor, and they were fighting evil. Now, Shazam, of course, fan of the comics, understand that it's made up of the powers of Solomon, Hercules, Atlas, Zeus, Achilles, and Mercury. So, it wasn't just Wonder Woman, which was DC that was on in the 70s. There actually was Shazam. I think there were a few other shows, other than your Spider-Man, things like that. So, Marvel's having a comeback right now, but it's worth going back and checking out Shazam. Next, this might have been my favorite in the bunch, as cheesy as it was, and this was Land of the Lost, and this aired from 1974 to 1977. Now, as the theme song tells you, Marshall, Will, and Holly were a family that was on a river boat trip, and they were thrown back in time after they went through a time portal after falling over a waterfall, and they must survive a dinosaur-dominated land. And this dinosaur land had these creatures called the Sleestaks. They were like giant lizards, men, really scary. And they had this little ape man that befriended them named Chaka. So me and my cousins, my sister, we used to watch this show all the time, Land of the Lost. They did a remake as a movie with Will Ferrell in the 2000s, but you can watch it if you want, but I highly recommend checking out the original series. It's a nice little bit of nostalgia with its cheesiness and special effects. Next, this one I used to always watch when I'd come home from school, and I would be at my grandmother's house, and it's 3-2-1 Contact. Now, this was actually on PBS, which Public Broadcasting System, from 1980 all the way through 1992. And it was a children's show explaining various principles of science and their applications. And they'd have different shorts, they'd have special guests, but I distinctly remember that one recurring show within the show they had on it was called the Bloodhound Gang. And these were teenagers and younger kids that solved mysteries, kind of like, your Nancy Drew Hardy Boy type thing, but they used logic, deduction, and everything kind of tied together. So I was always excited to watch 3-2-1 Contact, especially when they had an episode of the Bloodhound Gang. Next, The Great Space Coaster, 1981 to 1986. This was a children's program that featured three friends that loved to make music, and it had cartoons and musical numbers. And I remember, they were picked up by this guy, this giant puppet in a space coaster and taken to this asteroid, and they would show cartoons, they would have musical numbers, and I think probably the most famous was Gary Gnu was a character. It was a Muppet character, and his catchphrase was, "No GNUs, but good GNUs with Gary Gnu." I don't know why I remember that to this day, and a little bit of the Great Space Coaster song. But if you've never seen it, maybe one of your older siblings or maybe even your parents seen it, ask them about it. Next one, Space 1999. Now, this aired from 1975 through 1977. And this is the story of the crew of Moonbase Alpha as they must struggle to survive when a massive explosion throws the moon from orbit into deep space. This actually starred Martin Landau of movie fame. And it included a character which was an alien woman that can change into any living creature. Now, if my sister's listening to this episode, and my mom, if you recall, one afternoon when we were in our apartment, which was down the hall from my grandmother's in Rochdale, in Queens, New York, I was a toddler. I was in my crib. I couldn't call out, and my sister was watching this show, and something scared her. And what did she do? She ran out of the apartment, ran down to my grandmother's, and left me. Fortunately, my mother was just down in the basement of the building washing clothes and came up and got me before anything happened to me. So if my sister's listening to me, I remember you left me watching Space 1999. Next, Buck Rogers in the 25th Century. Now, I also liked Battlestar Galactica at this time, but Buck Rogers was my guy. 1979 to 1981. And this was a 20th century astronaut is revived out of 500 years of suspended animation to become the greatest hero of the future Earth. He had his little robot buddy Twiggy, had Commander Darling, who was Aaron Gray, and this starred Jill Gerard. Aaron Gray also went on to be on Silver Spoons. But fabulous show. They kind of jumped the shark in kind of the ending seasons when, they were no longer based on Earth. They were on a ship that was traveling and introduced this Hawkman guy that was an actor that I recognized years later as a mobster on One Life to Live. And it had, the evil princess. It was just a lot of crazy, cheesy space stuff. But I loved this show, watched it over and over again. I wish they had it in reruns now. Of course, it was based on the serials Buck Rogers from, the 20s and 30s and 40s. It was black and white, serials that they would show every week at the movie theater. But if you've never seen it, hopefully you can find it out somewhere. And that's Buck Rogers in the 25th Century. Next, this one, BJ and the Bear. This was one of my favorite shows, too. This is with Greg Evigan. It was from 1985. Nope, that's the wrong year. Sorry, 1978 to 1981. And the premise was simple. A trucker and his pet monkey travel the highways of America, getting into various adventures and misadventures along the way. Now, if you were later a fan of Knight Rider, basically this was Knight Rider in a truck. So BJ was trying to get his shipping goods from coast to coast and, had to deal with corrupt sheriffs and corrupt truckers. In fact, one of the sheriffs, Sheriff Lobo, ended up getting his own show later on, but I digress. Greg Evigan later went on to be on My Two Dads, which could have made this list with Paul Reiser. But, of the two, this show I liked more. I mean, it was on around the time that, who didn't want to drive a truck? And then Clint Eastwood had a run of movies with him and Clyde the orangutan. So Any Which Way You Can, Any Which Way But Loose. And I think this was the TV executives' way of taking advantage of people enjoying those Clint Eastwood movies. But it was an enjoyable show. It was mindless, silly fun. Next up on the list was a silly show called Small Wonder. Now, this was one of those shows that was in first-run syndication. So what that meant was it wasn't on a major network during prime time. This show was produced and was sold directly into syndication. So depending on where you were in the country, that depended what network, what station, and what time and day it came on. And it was from 1985 to 1989. And it was the story of a family where the father is an inventor, Ted Lawson, and he created a robot, Vicky, who was a girl, and she had a brother. And they had a nosy neighbor with a nosy kid, and all the time, each episode was them doing everything they could to prevent people from finding out that Vicky was a robot. And of course, her head could spin. She was super strong. She had all these different powers. And it was probably one of the silliest shows ever, but you kept coming back and watching it. And the theme song was silly, and the show was completely cheesy. But I remember watching it, and it was enjoyable. So it is a classic. Next two are very similar. They're actually Westerns in a sense. And the first up is called Wild Side. Now, Wild Side was only on in 1985. It didn't get renewed. And it was about 5 weapons specialists / cowboys that fought crime in the town of Wild Side, California. It took place in modern times, and 2 key stars on the show, or would become bigger stars, are Howard E. Rollins, who would later be on In the Heat of the Night, and Meg Ryan, before she went on to more fame in movies. And it's called Wild Side. Now, around the same time, next year, 1986, there was a show called Outlaws. Now, this was about 5 outlaws from the year 1886 that somehow traveled to the year 1996 and bring their own brand of justice to the future. So, of course, they were gunslingers, and one guy was good with a knife, and one guy was good with whips. And apparently no one in modern times was able to deal with these guys. I mean, it was canceled pretty quick. I think it was only about 6 episodes. But this could probably not only be considered a cult classic, but I think also shows that were actually canceled too soon. Wonderful, enjoyable, silly show. Both of them. And the fact that you had cowboys on it, it's kind of made it interesting. Next on the list was probably one of my favorite shows, and this show ended tragically too soon because the star of the show was killed in an accident while doing a stunt. He had a stunt pistol with a blank and ended up inadvertently shooting himself in the head, and he did not recover, unfortunately. But this show was called Voyagers, with an apostrophe, so it's Voyagers. And it's the story of a time traveler, Phineas Fogg. He's a member of a league of time travelers, and he ends up hooking up with this 12-year-old boy. Then what they do is they go through time repairing errors in world history. So think about it like Quantum Leap, years before Quantum Leap. And the premise was this guy was from the 1800s, and he was kind of like a pirate, or, not the best type person, and he was recruited by the time traveling society. And he used this watch that looked like a little watch with a compass, and it had lights on it. So when he traveled to a time, if the red light was on, you knew something was wrong in that time. And the initial episode, he ended up too far in the future than he was really supposed to be able to travel. He was in the apartment of this kid in San Francisco. The kid, his father had died, and he was just living with his aunt or his mother. But somehow, the kid and the dog fell out the window, and the only way for the time travel to save him was to jump out of the window and travel through time and catch him. So the only problem was the guy left his time travel manual behind. It had all history in it, and it had the list of how history was supposed to take place. So now you have this 12-year-old whose father, by happenstance, happened to have been a history professor. So this kid knew everything about history up until that time. And, the Phineas had to depend on this kid to tell him, what they needed to do to, fix history. I remember one episode, it was probably one of the early episodes, they met Babe Ruth, and they had to find a way to get him to start hitting him. He was a pitcher at the time. I think he was still with the Red Sox then. And he never really, because in the timeline they hopped into, Babe Ruth never picked up a bat and didn't go on to be the Sultan of Swing. Didn't go to the Yankees and have the house that Ruth built. So, but only the kid knew this because the other guy didn't know anything about what would have been his future and his history. So they had to help Babe Ruth learn that he can be a hitter. And then I remember at the end they jumped a little bit forward in the future and they saw Babe Ruth when he had become the Sultan of Swing, and he remembered them. And I just remember it just being a really interesting premise, and it's probably because why years later I probably enjoyed Quantum Leap so much, because there's something interesting about going through time to try to right wrongs, or fix something that went wrong that you thought the first time, or when you go through time, somehow something was messed up and you need to put it back right and figure out a way to do it. Time travel is always really interesting in shows like this, and that's probably why I enjoyed that so much. So there you have it. That's my list. There's a couple of more shows probably get honorable mention. One was a local show that was produced in New York on WPIX Channel 11. It was called The Magic Garden. And it was just two ladies that told stories, played music, and they talked to their friends in the garden, including a pink squirrel, which when I was younger, I didn't know he was a squirrel. Going back and thinking about it, and in hindsight, I realized, yeah, he was a squirrel. He had a squirrel tail. He would show up in a tree, and he would be on the fence. So, yeah, I feel silly later on realizing that I thought it was a dog. I never thought it was odd that a dog would be in a tree or on a fence. Mind you, I was younger when this was on, and I mean, hey, they were puppets. What do you expect? I wasn't a genius. When you're a kid, you believe in a lot of things. Okay, so sue me. But that was an enjoyable show. Another honorable mention, which was kind of like a modern version of the Mickey Mouse Club, which of course would also have a modern version of itself. And this was Kids Incorporated. That's it. And I just remember that would come on locally on Sunday mornings, and we'd watch it when we got home from church. These kids that I guess they worked at a local mall shop or something. I'm reaching back in time, but I remember that in every episode they would sing their version of a current pop hit. And you had the young kids, the two older kids, the guy, the girl, a young black kid that reminded me probably of a young Alfonso Ribeiro, and also it also starred Fergie from the Black Eyed Peas. She was actually one of the young girls that were on the show. So this is when she, was 8, 9, 10, around that late. So she was actually on that show. Now that I remember, Kids Incorporated. Your older siblings or your parents will probably remember it. You can probably find it somewhere on YouTube. That's it. That's my cult classics. Maybe I missed something that you were interested in. Maybe you want $6 Million Man or The Bionic Woman or Wonder Woman or The Incredible Hulk. I didn't want to bring in too many shows that were probably really, really well known. What's Happening? What's happening now? I mean, if I keep going on and on and on. And probably most of these shows, a lot of people don't remember, or they were more popular. And so, yeah, in a sense, they're classic, but not enough to be cult classics because everybody kind of loved them, including Welcome Back, Kotter, or Give Me a Break. Man, they're just coming to mind now. Either way, those are my cult classics. Send me a note. Hashtag or at Multifarious Man on Twitter, hashtag Cult Classics, or you can send me an email at multifarious.man.podcast@gmail.com, and always you can leave comments and notes on the blog website at www.multifariousman.com. All right, that's it for now, folks. I'll be right back, and we will wrap up the show. All right, we're back on the Multifarious Man podcast, episode 22, Must-See TV, Cult Classics Part 2. Well, I hope you enjoyed this and the previous episode, which was Part 1, which was Cult Movie Classics. Hopefully it brought to mind many shows you hadn't thought about in years, or movies you hadn't even remembered or even forgot that you forgot to remember. Either way, I hope you had an enjoyable time, as much fun as I did, kind of going back in time and thinking about these shows from my childhood. That's it. Like I mentioned also in the show, in a future episode, I am also going to talk about my favorite cartoons of all time, since, as I was doing this episode, I did have some cult classic TV shows that were cartoons. So I figured I might as well craft a whole episode talking about television cartoons. Well, that's it for this week's episode. And like I always say, why be various when you can be multifarious? Until next time, peace out. Numerous and varied, greatly diverse and manifold, all the things I want to say that never been told. Dina Sinatra to Drake and Pharrell. When I'm listening to this week, you can never tell. Bogey and Bacall, even Meryl Streep. The devil wears Prada, even the big sleep. It doesn't matter where you stand, I'm the multifarious man.